3 people crossed $100,000 in net worth in the same month last year. Same number. Same screenshot of the same little green line. You've had a version of that screenshot, or you're about to. Put your number next to theirs, because what happens next has almost nothing to do with how smart any of you are. Denise's 100 grand was 78% trapped inside the walls of a house. Omar sat in 3 index funds so boring they could legally be used as anesthesia. Wes's was in a brokerage account in cash, waiting for him to decide something. 30 years later, one of them is $986,000 behind the one who did the least. And here's the part that should bother you. The reason isn't really a decision he made, it's a decision that was made available to him. In week 6, unrequested, terms already filled in, it never showed up for the other 2 at all. My name is Nick, and I've spent an unreasonable amount of my life reading Federal Reserve spreadsheets so you don't have to. If you've ever hit a savings milestone and felt, for about 4 days, like you'd finally figured money out, hit subscribe, because today we're walking through exactly what happens after $100,000 in the order it happens. Let's start with the uncomfortable reality. Your $100,000 is not what your brain thinks it is. According to the Federal Reserve's Survey of Consumer Finances, your $100,000 puts you at roughly the 38th percentile in America. 38th. You're not in the club. You're not even in the parking lot of the club. You're statistically slightly below average, holding a number that feels enormous. And be careful, because this is where most finance channels lie to you with averages. You'll hear the average American household net worth is about $1,063,000. The median is $192,900. Same country, both numbers, the average is 3.5 times the median because a handful of people who own hospitals dragged it into orbit. When somebody quotes you an average net worth, they aren't informing you. They're doing a magic trick, but your milestone is real in one way. At your 100 grand invested at 7% real, your money throws off about $7,000 a year without you doing anything. The first moment in your life where your portfolio contributes something comparable to your own serious effort. Your snowball is finally rolling, which is exactly why this is the worst possible moment to take your hands off it. So, week 1, and the only question that matters yet, where is it sitting? Sounds like bookkeeping. It's actually the decision that determines everything after, because where your money sits decides who can see it, who can sell to you, and whether you can reach it when your car dies. Denise's answer, Omar's, and Wes's send them down 3 roads, and none of them know it yet. Denise did the single most respectable thing an American can do. She bought a house. Her statement says $104,000. It feels incredible, and it is also, in the most literal sense, a wall. Fed data shows the median household holds around 68% of its wealth in the primary residence. So if your $100,000 looks like the typical Americans, you don't own a portfolio. You own drywall. And drywall has fascinating properties as an asset. You can't sell yours in pieces. You aren't diversified. One asset, one city, one job market. Probably the same employer that signs your paychecks. You pay about 1% of its value a year just to keep it from rotting. $4,000 a year you never put on the screenshot. And getting your money back out costs 8 to 10%, which makes your house the world's most expensive ATM. Here's week 3 for Denise, and I want you to sit in it. It's a Tuesday. The transmission goes on the interstate. She's on the shoulder with her hazards on hold with a tow company, and while the hold music plays, she opens her banking app, $1,140 in checking. Then the other tab, the net worth tracker, $104,000. She looks at both numbers at the same time. Then she puts $2,200 on a credit card at 19% and drives home in a loaner, technically wealthier than 60% of the country. That's not a Denise problem, and if you just did that math on yourself and didn't like the answer, you're in the majority. Bankrate's 2026 survey found only about 47% of Americans could cover a $1,000 emergency. An earlier one put it the other way, 59% couldn't cover it without debt. I'll give you both rather than the scarier one. Here's what nobody tells you about crossing this number. Net worth is a scoreboard. It is not a bank account. You can't pay a mechanic in equity, and the tow truck driver has, in my experience, never once asked to see your Zillow estimate. Denise stays on that road 8 years, her wealth completely real and permanently out of reach. Now, week 6. Wes, his brokerage balance ticks past 6 figures on a Tuesday afternoon. Thursday morning, his phone rings. Local number. The man is warm, unhurried, genuinely likable. He mentions he works with a lot of people at Wes's company. He doesn't pitch anything. He asks whether anyone's ever built Wes an actual plan in a tone that makes clear that of course nobody has, and offers to buy him coffee. There's a small conference room with a whiteboard. There's a folder with Wes's name on the front, spelled correctly. Omar crossed the same threshold that same week. His phone didn't ring. Not once. Not that month. Not that year. And it wasn't only the phone. That same fortnight, 2 other things showed up. A pre-approved auto financing offer, rate already quoted, no application needed, and a cash-out refinance mailer because Redfin found the typical mortgaged homeowner sits on about $181,000 of untapped equity, and somebody would very much like to help untap yours. Nobody sent Wes any of that when he had $4,000. All 3 arrived within 6 weeks of one number crossing one line. Because $100,000 to $250,000 in assets is where you clear most advisors' minimums and where your credit profile tips into a tier that generates offers automatically. You didn't apply, you became eligible, and eligibility gets sold. So hold on to that fortnight, nothing bad happens in it, it's coffee and 2 envelopes. But everything Wes loses over 30 years traces back to it, and not mostly through the advisor, which is the part people expect. Through the envelope. March, the truck. Now, something does happen to you when you cross this number, and it's not a character flaw, it's a reflex. Some part of your brain files it as graduation. You drove the Corolla. You said no to the trip. And now the number says you made it, so your brain says reasonably we can stop being weird about money. But notice the timing, because this is the part I had wrong for years. That reflex doesn't fire on its own. It fires when something gives it permission, and the permission arrived in the mail in week 6, pre-approved, rate already filled in. Wes didn't wake up one morning and decide to shop for a truck. He'd been carrying a piece of paper in his kitchen drawer for 7 weeks that said yes before he'd asked. Boston Fed research found the marginal propensity to consume, the share of an extra dollar you spend rather than save, is roughly 10 times higher for low-wealth households than high-wealth ones. So you now have the balance sheet of a saver and the spending reflexes of someone who never had money. Those two are about to argue, and only one of them has access to financing. The average new car now costs about $49,353, up more than 30% since 2020. Your average payment, financed, is $772 a month. And here's where it stops being funny. 29.3% of trade-ins last quarter were underwater, the average person owing $7,214 more than the car was worth. 40% rolled that into an 84-month loan. 7 years. Long enough to finance a car, have a child, and have that child develop opinions about the car. And that number is the whole trap. Those people never finish their loans. They trade in early, still owing, and roll the shortfall into the next one. You don't have a car payment. You have a car payment subscription, and it renews before you've paid off the last one. That's why I'll model Wes's truck as a permanent line rather than a 7-year one for 29% of buyers. That's what it is. But the truck isn't the expensive part. The truck is what makes the expensive part necessary. Because the payment has to come from somewhere, and it comes from the only line in Wes's budget that doesn't send an angry letter when you skip it. That March, he stopped contributing. Not permanently, he told himself, just for a while. The number looked healthy, the market felt high, and $772 a month had to come from somewhere. This is the part that gets people. So let's price your 5-year pause. You're 32, 100,000 invested, 1,000 a month going in. You stop for 5 years, then resume. You saved $60,000 during that pause. At 7% real, it costs you about $476,000 by retirement, a 7-to-1 exchange rate on your own money. The dollars you skip in your 30s have the most runway, so when you pause at 32, you aren't deciding to save 60,000 less, you're deciding to work extra years at the end of your life, on a day when you feel great about money. And people almost never fix it. Only about 16% ever use catch-up contributions. That autumn, the market drops 11% in 3 weeks, and I want to stop and hand you something genuinely counterintuitive, because you've heard this next statistic used to argue the exact opposite of what it proves. You know the one. $10,000 in the S&P 500 at the start of 2005, left alone through 2024, becomes about 71,750. Miss the 10 best days and you have 32,871. Miss the 60 best days and you're left with 4,700 less than you started with. You've seen this chart in every advisor's slide deck since roughly the invention of the slide deck, always as an argument for being disciplined and clever. But look at the timing data underneath it. 7 of those 10 best days happened within 2 weeks of the 10 worst. And Ned Davis and Hartford Funds found roughly 78% of the best days landed during a bear market or in the first 2 months of a new bull. The best days don't arrive during calm stretches when you feel smart. They arrive in the middle of the wreckage, sitting directly beside the worst days like they're holding hands. So the chart isn't telling you to be disciplined, it's telling you your timing is structurally impossible. There's no version of you that dodges the crash and catches the rebound because they're the same week. The statistic you get shown to feel like a sophisticated investor is proof that nobody is one, including, and I'll say this gently, the person holding the slide. Picking is no kinder. Bessembinder studied nearly 26,000 US stocks and found about 58% underperformed 1-month treasury bills over their lifetimes. Just 86 companies produced half the wealth the US market created in 90 years. 86. So when you pick a stock, you're reaching for one of those, and the median thing you'll catch lost to a savings vehicle your grandmother would call boring, and Morningstar found the average dollar in US funds earned 8.7% a year, while the funds themselves returned 9.9%. That gap is you. It's the tax on flinching. Denise didn't watch any of it. She couldn't, there was nothing in her account to panic about, and the reassessment on the house had just gone up again. Wes and Omar had lunch that November. Wes mentioned his guy, the plan, the whiteboard, the folder, and offered an introduction. Omar said he'd think about it, then didn't, because the paperwork looked annoying and he'd have to find his login, which he'd lost twice already. That's the entire decision. No principle involved. Omar was mildly lazy on a Tuesday, and it made him a millionaire. Year 3. The folder. Say Wes signs at 1% of assets under management. Not a crook, not a scam, just the standard fee you'd be quoted. Take your 100,000, add 1,000 a month, 30 years, at 7% you end with about 2,032,000. At 6% after the fee, 1,607,000. That 1% costs you roughly $425,000, taken one invisible slice at a time by a fee that grows every time you succeed. Now, you're thinking, Nick, that's unfair. A good advisor earns their 1%. Sometimes, yes, and that Morningstar gap is the proof. You may genuinely need somebody to talk you off the ledge in March of a bad year, and an advisor who stops you panic selling once has paid for years of fees. That's real, and I won't pretend otherwise. But look at what you're paying for. Maybe 4 hours of coaching a year, priced as a percentage that compounds against you for 3 decades. A fee-only planner charging by the hour gives you the same conversation for $2,000. Same coffee, same whiteboard, same folder. The problem was never advice. It's a price structure that takes 1/5 of your life savings for it. And Wes never sees a bill. The fee comes out before the balance is shown to him, so every statement he opens for 30 years is a number already reduced, and it always looks like growth, because it always is growth, just less than there should be. If you had to hand somebody $425,000 in cash, you'd think about it for a year. You'll never be asked to. And if you crossed 100 grand and then made 2 or 3 of these calls yourself, you didn't fail a character test. You got marketed to at the precise moment you were most receptive by people trained to find you the week your balance moved. Denise got a version 2, hers a letter pre-approved offering to let her borrow against the house at a rate she called reasonable. She didn't take it. But she thought about it for 4 days over a transmission she'd already financed at 19%. That's how equity gets untapped. Not with a hard sell, with an envelope. That's why I built a school community. Not to sell you anything, because most people at this stage don't need an advisor. They need somebody to tell them what the pitch will sound like before it arrives. Links below if that's useful. Year 5. Omar finally does something. It happened by accident. His employer's retirement portal had a submenu, the kind named something like additional contribution elections, and buried inside was an after-tax option his plan happened to allow. He clicked it on a Thursday during a meeting he wasn't paying attention to. That click routed money past the ordinary limit into Roth space. Check whether your plan has one. For 2026, your 401k deferral limit is $24,500, but your total limit, counting employer money and after-tax contributions, is $72,000. That gap is the mega backdoor Roth, the most underused provision available at exactly your net worth. Alongside it, IRA 7,500 saw 4,400 single, 8,750 family, and URSA is the only triple tax-advantaged account in the tax code, which you're probably using for prescriptions. That distracted click is worth this to you, your 100,025 years, 7% gross. In tax-advantaged space, about 542,000. In a taxable account with 2% a year of tax drag, $338,000. $204,000 of difference, decided entirely by which envelope you put it in. Year 30. Let's add it up properly, because I've seen 100 videos list numbers like these and just stack them. Stacking them is wrong. Omar, 100,000, 1,000 a month, 7% real, 30 years. $2,032,000. Wes, same start, same salary, nothing for 5 years during the pause. Then 600 a month instead of 1,000 because the truck took 400 and kept taking it. And the whole thing at 6% instead of 7 because of the fee. He finishes with $1,046,000. The gap is $986,000. Take those three individually and the fee costs about $425,000, the pause $410, the truck $419. Add them and you get $1.25 million more than the actual gap because they overlap. Money the pause already cost him can't be lost twice to the fee. The honest number is $986,000, and I'd rather give you the real one than the scarier one. But here's the split that matters, and it's what I promised you at the top. Of that $986,000, the advisor, the coffee, the whiteboard, the folder accounts for about $280,000. 28%. Everybody expects the villain to be the guy in the quarter zip. He's less than a third of it. The other $705,000 came from the truck and the pause it forced, which is to say from the envelope, from a piece of paper that arrived unrequested in week 6 with the rate already printed on it. That existed only because a number he'd worked 10 years to build had crossed a line that made him eligible. That's the whole thesis. It was never really about the advisor. The advisor is the part you can see. Denise lands at about $1,226,000 ahead of Wes, well behind Omar. But look at the composition. Because it's the story her whole life told, $551,000 of that is the house, $675,000 is money she can actually reach. 55% liquid at 62 after 30 years of doing the responsible thing. She wasn't wrong to buy the house. She was wrong to read one number when she owned two very different assets. And Omar didn't win because he was disciplined. The tidy version of this story is that the boring guy had superior willpower, and that's not what happened. He forgot his password. He skipped the introduction because the paperwork looked annoying. He clicked a submenu during a meeting. Omar won because his phone never rang. His money sat somewhere that generated no commission for anybody, so not one person in the financial services industry had a reason to buy him coffee. He wasn't stronger than Wes. There was no folder with his name on it because there was no margin in printing one. I'm not a financial advisor, and none of this is financial advice. It's math, Federal Reserve data, and a lot of watching people get sold things at the exact moment they felt proudest of themselves. So here's the one thing I do tonight, and it takes 4 minutes. Work out what percentage of your net worth you could spend in the next 72 hours without selling anything, borrowing against anything, or paying a penalty. Not what the tracker says, what you can actually reach. For a lot of people, that comes back under 5%. And if that's you, you don't have $100,000. You have a scoreboard and a house. Because 100,000 isn't a finish line, isn't graduation, and is definitely not permission to stop paying attention. The number in your account didn't make you rich. It made you findable. Keep doing the boring thing. It was working. That's why they called.